Hello, and welcome to the Vertical Distinct podcast. My name is Rowena Morais, and our guest today is Doug Lawrence, the founder of Talent-C, a HR solution provider. And he has been instrumental in developing a curriculum to help people learn how to become more effective mentors. Now, in a previous interview that we ran, Doug explored the power of mentoring and what a transformative experience it can be, not just for the mentee, but perhaps surprisingly to some, for the mentor as well. In today's session, we explore what it takes for someone to begin this mentoring journey. And here we're looking at mentoring in the context of someone who is seeking to mentor another. Welcome to the show, Doug.
Thank you so much, Rowena, for having me. And I believe so much, wholeheartedly, actually, that the power of mentoring, I call it the gift of mentoring, is the one thing that I like to refer to. And so one of the things I think that we need to, when somebody is relatively new to the mentoring space, and let's say, for example, you've been approached by somebody that says, gee, I think I'd like you to mentor me. And you kind of take the step back and go like, oh, whoa, why me? Why would you pick me? And then, more importantly, is what are some of the things I need to be aware of before I even begin to go on this journey? Because in a lot of cases, the feeling for people when they first start on the mentoring journey is that, oh my goodness, I'm going to be making a huge influence. I'm going to perhaps change the direction or the life of somebody. And so it's understanding, number one, what's the mindset that you need to have to go into this? And number two, what are some of the tools that you need to have? And I think number three, part of why we're doing these podcasts is for people to understand the whole mentoring discipline as well. And I mean, that's a whole nother story all unto itself. So let's take a look at this from the aspect of somebody has come to us, and I have this happen to me quite often, is somebody will, out of the blue, a random person will come up and say, gee, I'd like you to mentor me. So part of the responsibility that I have, and anyone that's doing mentoring, the responsibility they have is to make sure that they're ready to go on this journey, because it's a two-way relationship, and it's a relationship where we both are going to learn, we're both going to grow personally and professionally. So what's the mindset I need to have going into this so that I can make sure I bring value? And one of the main things that I look for is, do I know a lot about myself? So it's the whole self-reflection part. So looking inside to be able to say, who am I as a person? Because part of being an effective mentor is understanding who you are. The way I describe it is I need to be solid. The core of me as a person needs to be solid before I can even begin to guide someone else on their journey, their mentoring journey, and going through that. So part of it is, the self-reflection, believing in myself, believing in my capabilities as a mentor to be able to guide others. So that's one of the main things. The other thing is that it's to understand the whole, we'll call it the discipline of mentoring, for lack of a better choice of words, but it's to understand that mentoring, there's a paradigm shift that's taken place, and mentoring has in fact evolved from the old traditional style of the person with the snow on the roof like myself that is passing on wisdom and basically telling the person they're spending time with, here's what I did, so therefore you should probably do much the same because, it worked well for me. Where the paradigm shift is now that this is a two-way relationship, but it's very much premised on the mentor asking a series of questions to guide the person to the answers that they're looking for.
So
sorry,
carry on.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, so this mindset thing you mentioned, it's pretty big issue, and if if you had to break it down into something a little bit more tangible, are there things that people can do to help determine their mindset, to discover that for themselves? Because it's not always easy, right, to say that you know yourself completely. Sometimes you can even surprise yourself that you think a particular way or that you react in a particular way. So what could you do to help determine the mindset that you have?
A large part of what we suggest is through the self-reflection process. And, sometimes you have to ask yourself some of those hard questions, like, a lot of where I see a lot of mentors struggling is they themselves don't believe in who they are as a person. And so, they're suffering as well from self-esteem and self-confidence challenges. And so it's getting their head wrapped around, how am I going to get myself out of that hole? Because the person that I could be spending time with could very well be struggling with self-esteem and self-confidence, issues. So I spend a lot of time mentoring mentors to get them to believe in what they bring to the table. And I think, from a mindset, it's going into the relationship with a positive attitude. So having that positive energy. It's going into into a relationship, understanding that I need to be an active listener. So I need to listen and hear what the person I'm spending time with. So a large part of that. What it also is that whole self-reflection. I can't emphasize enough about that you need to self-reflect and understand who you are as a person. And, there's obviously, that can mean different things to different people.
So an interesting thing just came to mind. You talk about the need for in the mentoring journey for the mentor to really be in touch with who they are. But at the end of the day, the mentoring process is really about the other person. It's not about yourself. So it's a kind of a balance that you have to achieve between making sure that you're coming to the table in the best way possible, but at the same time, it's not about you. It's about the person that you're mentoring. So how do you see that conflict, so to speak, work itself out?
Well, part of it is that, so with the paradigm shift in mentoring, and I hear what you're saying is that, it is about the other person, and yes, it definitely is, but I also know when I go in and let's say I'm spending time with you, I know I'm going to learn something from you. You're going to help me, even though you may not know it, but our interaction, our conversation, the things we talk about helps me become a better person as an effective mentor. So part of, I guess, the mindset is taking us back to that topic is to make sure that you're open-minded enough to understand that, even though you're supposed to be the person that's guiding the other person, they in turn are going to be helping you grow personally and professionally as well through that process. Okay. So I think, that's definitely one of the things as part of that mindset is I talk about this, and I went through this not too horribly long ago with one of the folks that had gone through our program, is a certified mentor practitioner and was actually working with at-risk youth and was struggling with the fact that in his mind, what he thought the outcomes should be weren't happening. And a large part of that was he went into the relationship with certain expectations. And if you want to set yourself up for failure, go into there with some preconceived expectations and you probably stumble and fall. And the sad part of that is what will end up happening is you may very well turn someone off of the mentoring process. And I've seen that happen before where I've spoke to, some young professionals and they basically said, get away from me. I don't want to talk. Don't talk to me about this mentoring stuff because here's the experience that I had. And if that's what it's all about, I don't need that in my life. And I went, oh my gosh, no, that was a bad example. that you went through, and we can turn that around, by doing things a little bit differently. But, coming back to my colleague, that he went into it setting expectations that were his, and he was imposing is a strong word, but I'm going to use it anyhow because it's the best one that I can think of right now. But he was trying to impose his expectations on the relationship, and you can't do that. You have to be open-minded, fluid, and flexible enough to be able to say, okay, let's try and work around this.
Okay, I want to get a little bit more clarity on that, because while we can understand on a theoretical level what that means, in practical terms, how does one not bring one's expectations into it? Because you're always thinking, you've got 101 thoughts, you've got to control your mind, you've got judgment, you've got reaction. How do you really put that into action?
So when I go in, I go into a mentoring session with somebody, and I have expectations, but and it just comes from practicing, I think, more than anything else. But what I typically try to do is to be able to say, it comes back to what you had said earlier, is that this isn't about me. This is about the person that I'm spending time with, right? So
right.
Good point that you brought up is that I may very well think we need to be here when in fact we're only here. And so I need to readjust my position, my thought process to be able to do that. And so it's a work in progress, I guess, is the best way. Can somebody on day one, their first day of mentoring, be able to, they're going to go in with expectations. Human nature being what it is, they're going to go in and they're going to say, this is what I'm hoping will come out of this, and I'm going to work hard to get us there, when the relationship, the mentoring relationship, needs to really truly be very fluid and flexible. So to impose expectations on people, albeit the fact it's human nature, it is dangerous, and so you need to be able to try to manage that as best you can. And like I said, on day one, will you be successful in doing that? You may and you may not, but then don't go, oh, I'm a failure at mentoring. Take the step back, do the self-reflection part, and sort of say to yourself, okay, what went well, what didn't go well, and what could I do differently in a similar situation? And that's what I do every single time. And I have hundreds of hours of mentoring that I do on a yearly basis, and I reflect like that after every time.
So let's just bring this forward in a more tangible way for our listeners. Let's just say there is someone now who's ready to start, okay? He's never done this before. What would you advise would be some critical preparatory steps that they can take?
Obviously, I'll premise this from two fronts. I'll look at it, number one, from an organizational standpoint. If you're setting up a mentoring program in your organization, please get some training of some sort. Training is paramount in order to guarantee the success of a mentoring program in an organization. That's one issue. The other one is you as a person come and say, I'd like to mentor somebody, or I've had somebody come to me and have said, would you please be my mentor? The one thing I will suggest to you, if you were to come to me like that, is I'd say, it's advantageous for you to do a little bit of research around. There's lots of best practices and stuff that's out there. There's lots of information that you can get on the mentoring process. There's some really great thought leaders in that discipline. Take some time to understand the process, the mentoring process, because it has evolved. It has changed. It's not, like I said before, it's not the person with the snow on the roof, so to speak, and telling people how to this is what I did when I was in the business world, or this is what I did when I was doing this, or whatever. It's now a two-way trusted relationship, And understanding that is really, really important, because if you don't, you're going to quite possibly have a bad experience. It may turn you off mentoring, but it will definitely turn the person that you're spending the time with, it will definitely turn them off. And I see that a lot. So, the best advice I can give is understand the mentoring process, the mentoring discipline. And if, you're in a place where you can actually get the training or go to a workshop or do some research online and that, please take the time to do that, because that having the tools will just help make you that much better of a mentor.
Okay.
So that would be for me, it's having, when I look back to when I started my journey, I wish I had the tools that I have today back then, because number one, it would definitely help me with the people that I spent time with. Number two, from a leadership perspective, it strengthens my leadership capabilities, because it gives me some tools that are really important in the leadership arena today that we probably didn't have before.
Can you, from experience, can you walk us through a situation or a client you've had where you could just outline some missteps that a mentor might take and how to deal with it?
Sure. Okay. So a young professional is, and this kind of ties back to probably the example, and I hate to pick on that person all the time, but it's a good example. So it is a young professional is in a work environment where things aren't going the way that they think they should. They get referred to you as a mentor, and with the idea in mind is they're looking for somebody to help them in a job hunting campaign. And so the job hunting campaign is one of the things that we as effective mentors may very well have to deal with. So in that particular case, in your initial first meeting, you want to be able to get an understanding of the person. You want to be able to get an understanding of what some of the challenges are that they may very well be dealing with. And so part of that is that the mentor can sometimes forget the purpose of why they're meeting and can spend more time focusing on telling stories about themselves without getting an understanding and starting to build the trusted relationship with this other person. And so building that trusted relationship can take a bit of time, but the big thing there is that that's sort of the foundation to the mentoring journey with that person. So I've seen where that hasn't taken place, and so that's one of the things that we definitely need to make sure. Like you had said before, was the focus needs to be on them. Yes, that it does, because that's part of the process. We also need to be open-minded and flexible enough to know that we're going to learn through this process. We're going to see some things, hear some things, and maybe do some things that we may not have done before. So part of the process is obviously the sharing of quite possibly some personal information that you may not normally readily share in order to build that trusted relationship. And so for some of us, doing that's an uncomfortable thing. But without that, and without that being able to do that, you're going to have a challenging time building that trusted relationship.
Is
the other one? Sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to ask: is the point of sharing a personal story and probably the personal nature of the story might involve some sort of weakness or something that they normally wouldn't share with other people? Is the whole point of that to display vulnerability?
Yes. That you're human, like everybody else.
Right. And so if you can show that, then you are, hopefully, he's in a far more receptive position to then do the same.
Yeah.
Is it a precondition? Like, is it almost like you should do that if you want to get the ball rolling?
Is it mandatory? Probably not, but does it help? Definitely yes. And part of it too is, and so here's a difference. So starting off, if you were starting off on your mentoring journey right at the very, very beginning, what we talk about when we deliver some of the training, we tell people that as you get more and more experienced, you can probably build a trusted relationship in the first time that you meet, because part of it is being able to create a safe environment where both of you feel safe, and once that safe environment has been created, the sharing of information back and forth happens a lot more freely. So that's part of that process. Typically, I usually start off the conversation by saying, I would really be honored if you would share a little bit about yourself with me so I can better understand, kind of the journey that you're on with your life today, and start the conversation going that way and get them to sort of say, and you'll get a sense very quickly in their response whether or not they feel comfortable, or whether you're going to have to become vulnerable and share something yourself in order to open that door a little bit further. And if you do, you need to be, obviously you need to be prepared to do that. That's probably one of the things, when we talk about, the mindset and what are some of the critical steps to prepare before you start, it's being comfortable with having to share that sort of information.
Does when the mentee is sharing the personal information, and we're assuming that they have a challenge or problem that they want to resolve, which is why they are coming to you, is the choice of what they share an indication of where the problem may lie?
It usually is. So you may get a situation where one of the common things is, well, I don't think I could do that. So, okay, help me understand why you feel that way. Well, I just don't think I'm good enough to be able to do that. Okay, let me give you a sense of how I feel just based on this very short time we've spent together. I feel you're selling yourself short and that you are capable of a lot more. And I think that, I know that if we spend some time together that we're going to be able to work through some of that. So can you share with me a little bit more about some of the things that took place in your life as you were growing up? And the reason I ask that is that in a lot of situations, I find that self-esteem and self-confidence comes from their upbringing. So they may have. I remember I was dealing with one person, and the mother and father set extremely high expectations for academic achievement, and when they didn't achieve those high standards, they felt like a failure. They felt really bad. They felt, and then it gets to the stage where they started to internalize stuff they wouldn't share with their parents, so on and so forth. And so we needed to work through that. So being able to, to be open-minded enough and obviously flexible enough to listen and hear for those comments, and then being able to come up with an idea of, okay, how are we going to navigate through some of those to be able to rebuild that self-esteem and self-confidence. And, when I think back to the young professional that I spent time with before, that was one of the big things, was the whole idea of self-esteem and self-confidence. And so, I talk a lot about triggers, and the triggers come from listening for that in the conversation and then understanding, do I need to explore that a little bit further? And if I do they respond? Or do they sort of back away because they're not quite ready to talk about that? and then do I kind of put that particular topic or that issue in the parking lot, as I call it, and I'll come back to it later. I'll circle back around and I'll reframe a question that'll get us back into that area again, because you get a sense that it's something we need to explore and talk about and get it on the table and talk about it rather than allowing them to internalize it.
So this begs the question then. You really cannot mentor somebody unless they are ready to be mentored, correct?
Yes. Yeah, and I've actually seen examples of that. I've experienced them. I was working with a young man, at-risk youth, and we never made the connection. We just wasn't ready to go down the mentoring path. Couldn't build trusted relationship with him. We could never get close enough to be able to do that, and it wasn't ready. And I've also seen out of that same group of individuals, I've also seen people that have said, I don't need a mentor. I can figure this out on my own. And so trying to, force mentoring on them wouldn't work.
Doesn't work. Okay.
No.
Right.
Doesn't work.
Doesn't work. Okay. So how with organizations that decide that they want to embrace mentoring, and with people that are then tasked with it, how do you work around this issue if you've got somebody who doesn't want it? How do you make sure you educate your leadership about some of these challenges and how to work around it, how to deal with it?
So now, one of the main things that we talk about quite a bit, and there's definitely some research out there, but is the idea of looking at the culture to determine whether or not it's mentor ready. And so implementing a mentoring program for the sake of implementing a program is not the desired way to go. And so, there's really 4 reasons from an organizational standpoint, 4 reasons why mentoring programs or mentoring cultures will fail, and that's lack of corporate support, lack of structure, lack of training, and then the culture won't support mentoring. So what I see in a lot of the stuff that we do is that there's a lot of underlying challenges in the organization that we need to maybe address before we even talk about implementing mentoring. And so I did a culture assessment, sort of the terminology that we use. I did a culture assessment to determine mentor readiness in an organization not too horribly long ago, and one of the things that came out, one of the common themes, was the aspect of there was poor communication within the organization. And so people were reluctant to have some of those hard conversations that we need to have from time to time, and people just they weren't actively listening in a conversation. There was all of the elements of effective communication were not in place. And so we recommended that they bring in another facilitator to deliver a program called Crucial Conversations, and that's helped turn around the culture where it's ripe for the picking for implementing a mentoring program or a mentoring culture. So
So that's really something a mentor needs to consider before they take on this sort of job. You mentioned 4 items just now. Could you just run through them again?
I sure can. So the 4 things, the 4 reasons why mentoring programs will fail, and the statistics are pretty alarming. They are lack of corporate support, lack of structure, lack of training, and a culture that won't support mentoring. Those are the 4, and there's lots of research out there for people to, if they want to poke around and take a look, but those are the 4 main reasons that we see today why, programs fail. And the numbers are anywhere from 79 to 90% of programs will fail because those 4 elements aren't being considered. And I see organizations that have done a really good job, and they've got the corporate support. The leaders walk the walk and talk the talk. They've got the structure, so they've put the right things in place to make sure that the program is solid. They've gone and acquired the training, whether it's, workshops, formal training, designations, whatever you want to, do, but they've got the training, and their culture is a mentoring culture. So it's a combination of formal and informal mentoring, and mentoring becomes a way of life in the organization.
Which should be excellent. Those 4 elements you mentioned, they're all pretty big elements each in itself. And, if a company were to have even 2 of these issues or challenges to deal with, you've got some pretty big issues before you can even begin to think about mentoring, right? Well, we're coming up to half an hour. Now, before we wrap up, I just wanted to take us back. When we started this conversation, we were looking really at exploring how someone could begin this mentoring journey. You talked about the importance of having the right mindset, coming into things with an open mind. We talked about the idea that there are some critical things that you need to do to prepare beforehand, which makes a lot of sense. And the thing about it, though, that I was wondering is, the structure around that. If somebody decides that they want to go and get themselves properly trained, they go and do that. But what if someone just decides that they're going to do a whole bunch of reading and research but not go get the training? Would that be sufficient?
Can be, but ideally isn't the best approach, because it's great to take all that research, but if you're not given the opportunity to put it into practical experience and do that in a mentored process, I guess. So if, let's say, for example, you decide that, I don't know, I want to spend a whole bunch of money and stuff, and so I'm going to go and do all this research online, and then I'm going to go and do some mentoring. The one thing I would suggest is that reach out to somebody that is a thought leader in the industry and say, here are some of the things that I'm thinking about doing, and get some feedback, bounce it off of them. I do lots of mentoring of the mentors, so I'll do a Skype call. Somebody will say, gee, I'm trying to figure out how to use the Socratic method in the right context. Would you be willing to spend some time with me? Yes, by all means. So I spend the time with them, and I do a lot of that. And most thought leaders that are out there in the mentoring discipline are quite willing to, spend a bit of time with somebody that wants to become a mentor and has done some, obviously some preliminary research into the process and the best practices and that. But I would say that if you're not going to take any formal training, whether it's a workshop or, you going through and getting a professional designation in it, you need to, on top of the research that you're going to do, you need to sort of have somebody walk you through different scenarios. Just so kind of what I like to suggest to people is, let's talk through some of the situations that you think you're going to be dealing with, and I'll ask you a series of questions to guide you where you need to go. And I think that's probably the best approach.
Okay. One final question now. In the early stages of your journey as a mentor, you want to make sure you get it right. You don't really want to have the hard case study or client too early in the game. It might just, as you pointed out, ruin it for yourself, and more importantly, ruin it for the mentee. So how do you go about, 2 questions, how do you go about looking for the right mentee, and how do you identify when you found the most appropriate person for yourself?
So the first one was about identifying the right mentee, and I think that in most situations, they will find you.
Okay.
So they will find you. I know that, with the program that we offer, and I don't want to get into too much into that because we're here about sharing information and that. But one of the things we do, it's a combination of academic and practical. So you end up having to go and find the one at the end of the level 1 program, you have to do 10 hours of mentoring, and we suggest 2 to 4 different mentees, apprentices, whatever term you want to use, and people go out and search for those people on their own. So typically in a lot of those situations, they're looking for people that they may have already had a relationship with, albeit a friend type relationship, and they've just transformed that into a mentoring relationship. In other situations, I've seen people that have said, it's like, I remember a time where a colleague of mine was going through the executive business coaching and called me up and said, I need to do some practicums. Would you be willing to be one of the people that I do some executive business coaching with? And I went, sure. So I have had some of our mentor interns, for lack of a better choice of words, that have done much the same thing. They've gone out and said, I need to acquire 10 hours of mentoring. Would you be willing to be one of my candidates, one of the people I spend time with? So, when they have the same sort of thing after the level 2 program where they have to do 20 hours. So it's the same sort of thing as reaching out to people and sometimes you'll get referrals. People will just hear about you. The guy that I'm spending time with this week, and we're doing level 2 with him, he's had referrals. People, because of the job that he's doing, because of the training that he's had, he's now getting more and more people coming to him and saying, would you take the time to mentor me? So what was the second part of that again, please?
The second one is identifying the most appropriate mentee.
I don't know if there is the one. I think for me, and what I encourage people is that I've never turned anyone away. So I guess the answer is, for me, and I think for most people, as you get a little bit more experience than that, is that it becomes very difficult to say, no, I don't think so. I think what ends up happening is, for your first, as you're building the trusted relationship, that's going to be the factor that's going to determine whether or not this is a good match. Because if you can't build the trust, then it's not a good match. And so sometimes that you don't know that until you get partway into the relationship building process.
Okay.
And I know, for somebody that's starting out, that's probably sort of an ominous thing to have to sort of deal with is, I'm going to go in and I may be successful and I may not be. Part of that is that just comes from how adept you get at building that trusted relationship, at building that safe environment. And it won't happen initially overnight. Sometimes it may take you 4 or 5 meetings in order to be able to get that. Where, the more experienced you get, you can probably build that in the first time that you sit down, because people just feel comfortable because of the confidence that you give off, the confidence in your self-esteem at your capabilities in being able to mentor. So that's why, we go back to the mindset part, that self-reflection part, and believing in who you are as a person and the difference you're going to be able to make in someone else's life or in an organization. That's powerful by itself.
Absolutely. Okay, that's great. So to recap, today's session was all about what it takes to begin this mentoring journey. Thank you so much, Doug, for coming on and sharing with us all this wonderful insight. If you had one final piece of advice to the budding mentor, what would it be?
Don't be discouraged if things don't happen to fall in line with what you think they are. Remember to believe in yourself, be fluid, be flexible, and help. Know that you're giving back. That's the big thing. This is an opportunity for you to leave a legacy by helping others, and others as in people and organizations, to be the best that they can be. So embrace the power of mentoring and share the gift of mentoring. And that would be sort of my final words.
Absolutely. Great. Good stuff. All right. Thank you so much, Doug, and I look forward to chatting with you again soon. Thank
Thank
you.
you very much.